where I am, and I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome everyone to our December and final session in our 2021 LAMposium in Your Living Room series. We really are delighted to have you join us this evening. A lot of enthusiasm around this event. My name is Charlene Dunn. I am the Patient and Clinical Programs Director for the LAM Foundation, and on behalf of the Foundation, it is my pleasure to welcome you. We have a fantastic and much anticipated program ahead. You may remember that we kicked off this educational series with Dr. Brown, Mary Beth Brown, in May of 2020, just as her exercise study was getting underway. Tonight finds us coming full circle as we now have the opportunity to hear from Dr. Brown at the conclusion of her study. To provide a brief history of this study and how it evolved, in November 2017, scientists, clinicians, and patients gathered at the first ever LAM Patient Benefit Conference and focused on the following question: how can we improve the lives of LAM patients in 5 years or less? Before the conference began, the Foundation conducted surveys with patients and clinic directors to identify the mental and physical issues that were most important to them. These results determine the mission of the conference: to identify and fund proposals for new products or services that could best meet patients' needs in the short term. During the conference, participants and thought leaders focused on these topics in moderated workshops, brainstorming potential solutions and grant proposals. One such topic was exercise in women with LAM. That is, while we were often instructed to stay as active as possible, we are not always instructed on how to achieve this, especially when navigating exercise intolerance or fatigue. Dr. Brown proposed a mobile health platform that would empower women to better understand their optimum level of exercise and learn how they might stick to that routine. This exciting project received funding from the LAM Foundation, and tonight, coming in under 5 years, we will learn the outcomes. Following Dr. Brown's presentation, we will have time for Q&A before moving into our group discussion, which this evening will feature several of the women who participated in this study. As we all know, a study such as this cannot happen without patient involvement. We are fortunate to have had exemplary engagement from 15 of our women with LAM, as well as from a control group comprised of 15 otherwise healthy women. A primary investigator also needs tremendous support in her lab, and Dr. Brown had a stellar team assisting her. Her team is pictured here alongside the names of our study participants who consented to have their names shared this evening. So please join me in lifting your hand or giving a thumbs up, otherwise offering a huge shout out to this crew who, despite a pandemic, brought this project to fruition. Finally, I would like to take a moment to thank our generous sponsor, the National Disease Research Interchange, or NDRI, for their continued support of this educational series. A couple of quick housekeeping items before I turn this over to our moderator. Microphones will be muted throughout Dr. Brown's presentation, and we ask that you please limit your use of the chat box to questions for Dr. Brown. Finally, for optimum viewing, I would suggest you use the speaker view option for the presentation and the gallery view for our group discussion. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Hallie Hill, our liaison moderator for the evening. Hallie has been active with the Foundation since her diagnosis in 1999 and recently joined our LAM Liaison Network to support our women in the Greater Vancouver, British Columbia area. Hallie attended the Patient Benefit Conference, and she participated in Dr. Brown's exercise study. She has also been active in the NIH protocol and our Pacific Northwest area activities. Outside of her engagement with the Foundation, Hallie taught for 17 years, finding the spirited youngsters in grades 1 and 2 to be her calling. Now retired due to changes in health, Hallie is surrounded by dear friends and is passionate about supporting others, getting outdoors, breathing fresh air, and camping, oftentimes accompanied by her 3.5-year-old short-haired cat, Gizmo. Hallie, thank you for moderating this evening's session, and I will now turn it over to you.
Wow. Thank you, Char. I'm excited to be a part of today's LAMposium in your living room. I was practicing that and I kept saying to myself, LAM in your lap. And I thought, no, it's in your living room, Hallie. While a webinar isn't the same as meeting in person and sharing as many hugs as possible, It is a pretty amazing way to stay connected to one another and to the research. So thank you everyone for joining us today. I have the honor of introducing Dr. Mary Beth Brown. Dr. Brown is an associate professor in the Department of Rehabilitation Medicine, Division of Physical Therapy at the University of Washington. Her research is focused on exercise responses in patients and rodent models of pulmonary disease. Her past research helped to establish exercise recommendations for patients with pulmonary arterial hypertension and cystic fibrosis. After attending the LAM Foundation Patient Benefit Conference in 2017, it became clear that there was an urgent need for research on exercise and fatigue in LAM. Dr. Brown recently concluded this study that examined the impact of a home-based mobile health exercise program for patients with LAM and characterized skeletal muscle and skeletal muscle response to exercise in LAM. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Brown at the Patient Benefit Conference, as well as at a regional meeting shortly afterwards. I love Dr. Brown's enthusiasm and eagerness to work with us, so I signed up and, to my surprise, actually completed the study. I won't pretend to know how much work goes into getting everything and everyone lined up and in place, the proposals, the approvals that are needed, the coordinating of all the tests, equipment, and staff. But she had an amazing team, and she pulled them all together so that she could do this study for us. And as noted earlier, most of the study was done during COVID. Dr. Brown, I am looking so forward to your presentation. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Hallie. What a nice introduction. I am just humbled and honored to be here. I'm going to go ahead and switch. May I jump onto my screen? It's just so fantastic to come full circle, right? So it's been in the works for a bit, this study, and it's exciting. Today's such a fun day for me because I get to share with you what we learned and really why I can't thank you enough, all of the participants and funding from the LAM Foundation, why I can't thank you enough for trusting me to be the leader of this and for letting us do it. So I'm going to go ahead and start some slides, and can you give me a thumbs up that you can see this okay? Okay, great. So this is a similar slide start from last year, exercise in LAM, what do we know, except it's what do we know now, because we're going to update some of the slides that I showed you last year with some new data from the exercise study, and then also talk about some things that are next. So we started with this last year, and we need to start with it again, because I don't think we can see these kinds of slides enough. This is outlining basically why we should exercise. This is the very well-known health benefits associated with regular physical activity. And this long laundry list that you see here, all of these bullet points aren't just based on one or two studies that suggest that these benefits can occur. These are all based on a volume of literature showing that regular physical activity has an important impact on all of these important factors in our health and well-being. There's also a pretty popular figure to show, and maybe you've seen this, I showed it last year, of just moderate to vigorous physical activity, the amount of that shown on the bottom axis here, and the daily sitting time that a person is involved with. So it's outlining the risk for all-cause mortality. So your likelihood of dying from whatever cause, and how much that transitions to lower risk as your moderate to vigorous physical activity increases, and also as your daily sitting time goes down. So what does this mean for us? Well, many of us have jobs where we're sitting a lot of the day, right? But being more active despite that sitting can be extremely helpful to push towards this green zone of less risk of mortality. So why do we need to do it? We know it's good for our health to do it. It lowers our risk for all-cause mortality. It lowers our risk of all of these other comorbidities shown here. And really, you are at risk for these things. All of us are, because we're human beings. And this is a tendency for patients with a disease to think of themselves, unfortunately, in this is me, these, in the case of LAM, these lung cysts, but this is not equal all of you. There's a whole lot of you that can be taken care of better, despite the impact of physical activity, whether there's an impact or not on lung function itself in your disease. There's a huge impact of that regular physical activity on all of these other aspects of you. So I like to introduce this talk with that, because it's important to the overall question of why should we bother with it? Why are we having this talk? Do we need to be engaged in exercise? I also showed this slide last year because the question is raised, is there any evidence that exercise is beneficial in LAM? And there is. There's actually a nice study done, published a few years ago now, by our Brazilian friends that have been studying LAM, and particularly were interested in the impact of pulmonary rehabilitation. So they conducted a nice randomized controlled trial where they had one group perform pulmonary rehabilitation, one group of LAM participants, and another group just go through an observation period during that same time. And they had pre and post testing for a lot of the things that you already do in your clinic setting. So pulmonary function test, 6-minute walk test. They also did some strength tests and measured physical activity with a pedometer. They did surveys for respiratory symptoms, as well as clinical evaluation and a maximal exercise test. And they repeated that after that 3-month period of pulmonary rehabilitation. And I went through the details of this study last year, so I'm not going to go through it again, other than to give you a brief bulleted summary of their major findings, which was per the pulmonary function tests, there was not an impact of the exercise program on lung function. However, despite that lack of improvement in lung function, there was a significant improvement in how much habitual physical activity the patients with LAM participated in, as measured by their accelerometer activity monitor. Also, their health-related quality of life indicators. So those surveys that many of you might have done if you've been in other studies. A reduction in symptoms, and most importantly, an improved exercise tolerance. They actually increased their time on their 6-minute walk test, which is also a test I know is near and dear to everyone's heart in this room, because you do lots of them. And then as well as muscular strength. I liked that study because I was happy to see the well-controlled evidence there on this exercise effect in LAM. But I also had to ask the question, as I've done in other patient populations, can we achieve these benefits and more, but at least these benefits with a home-based program rather than a supervised, formal pulmonary rehabilitation center? And that's an important ask, particularly when we try to apply this broadly. I probably don't have to tell this group how challenging it can be when you do get an order for pulmonary rehab. Sometimes finding a center that will work within your driving distance or has availability, and or even making time in your schedule to be able to go there a few times a week and participate in the program. So I'm very interested in how we can maximize benefit of our exercise interventions in removing as many barriers as possible to people performing them. So this is where I asked the question, could we replicate a lot of the study, but do it with a home-based program? And the timing, as you've already heard, the origin of this story really came out of this exercise and fatigue workshop. And here pictured are some of us gathered those couple of days where we did just mash out what are the things that patients care about regarding exercise and fatigue, and what are the priorities of those? What matters the most to women with LAM? What can we do about these big unknowns? We had as you do with brainstorming sessions, the sticky board with the notes. We sketched out things. Here's a drawing I had put together of what a mobile health program might actually look like, and an app-based program could look like. And we took all of that input and put it together into this study. So all of those sticky notes, all of the common themes, and put them together into the study. And this became the Mobile Health to Increase Patient Accessibility to Exercise and elucidate exercise and fatigue in LAM. And this was funded by a patient benefit grant from the LAM Foundation, as you've already heard. The three major aims were to determine feasibility and usefulness of a mobile health exercise program. And the feasibility and usefulness, those are common terms used when you're really just piloting something without a huge number. You're piloting something, a new idea, in not a huge patient population. So as in our case, we had 15 women with LAM. In addition to piloting the feasibility of this kind of mobile health program and the usefulness, we also were interested in how this could be applied, potentially expanded into use as a large-scale data repository, where patients could use some of these mHealth platform devices to actually allow patient-collected variables to be used by other researchers. And then lastly, we were interested in this unknown on potential skeletal muscle involvement in LAM, because it hadn't been looked at yet. And enough attention has been paid, or enough loud voices have been heard about this common complaint of fatigue in LAM that it really needed to be looked at. So we proposed, while we were looking at exercise in LAM and bringing these women together, that we would also include some endpoints that would allow us to specifically examine muscle and whether there was any relationship to exercise intolerance and the fatigue symptoms, and how that responded to an exercise program. So this is what our study protocol looked like. It's very simple design, actually. It's just like the study out of Brazil, that it was just a baseline and a final visit, separated by a 12-week program. The major difference being, though, that our 12-week program was a smartphone-guided home exercise program with health monitoring, rather than a person coming to pulmonary rehab twice a week and performing supervised exercise. So that was a major difference. In terms of the exercise program itself, our frequency was a little bit up from the 2 times a week pulmonary rehab that was performed in the previous study I talked about, because we did aerobic sessions 4 times a week is what we asked study subjects to do. And we gave them a target heart rate range. And HRR here stands for heart rate reserve, which means we gave them a range calculated based on their maximal exercise test at this initial visit. So it was tailored to what their exercise capacity was. We also gave them some resistance exercises to do, also for strength training, but these were also done at home with no equipment or very minimal equipment, and mostly body weight type exercises. In addition to that exercise program, we also performed health monitoring during that entire period. So participants wore a wrist-worn accelerometer. This, in our case, we used a Fitbit heart rate charge 3, and that provided multiple physical activity metrics, as well as we asked patients, and this was every day they wore this. We also asked participants to provide weekly home spirometry measures for us using a home spirometer that would Bluetooth into their phone, and we would receive that report. We did that mainly because we wanted to see how during the course of an exercise program, if there was any relationship between the symptoms people were reporting on their daily fatigue and shortness of breath report with what their weekly home spirometry looked like and with what their physical activity metrics looked like. And then lastly, we took very seriously the monitoring during home exercise, where every session of home exercise patients were asked to wear a pulse oximeter, and we used a couple different types so that we could monitor oxygen saturation, which in this talk will be abbreviated as SpO2, during the home exercise sessions. So not just a spot check, before and after, but actually recorded during the entire length of their 30 to 45 minute exercise session, as well as their heart rate tracing that whole time. So this was second by second data that we received. And this was over the entire 12 weeks. The baseline visit and the final visit looked very similar because they were, mirror testing that was performed. And we conducted all of them out at the Fred Hutch here in Seattle, which has a beautiful research-only space for exercise and nutrition type studies. So we conducted that there, and we were able to perform pulmonary function tests there. We performed maximal exercise testing. So we measured VO2 max and all of the other variables that we can measure with maximal exercise testing. And we did 6-minute walk test and computerized dynamometry for muscle strength of the lower extremities. And then we also obtained a sample of skeletal muscle. And this is from a biopsy from the patient's quadricep muscle on the outside of their thigh. As both Shar, I think it was Shar that said it, is that we completed our enrollment, which is remarkable during COVID and really speaks to the enthusiasm, passion, and motivation of this community, and particularly the patients that raised their hand, the women with LAM that raised their hand to say they would be in it. Despite all the barriers, they did it. And I really couldn't be more tickled about that, because it is unexpected that that could happen during a time of a pandemic. We were slowed down during certain periods, at the height of the pandemic, where we had to delay somebody coming back in by a little bit, and had to rely on a few different creative ways of obtaining a few pieces of data. But for the most part, we got a complete data set. Despite that, we just, had to be flexible. And the Fred Hutch works primarily with patients experiencing cancer and undergoing treatment for cancer. So they are very much equipped for working with immunocompromised individuals and very high safeguards in place for transmission of pathogens. So it was actually a perfect setting to be conducting research in during a pandemic, because they rolled right into no problem, here's the changes that we'll make to minimize transmission. And it really didn't hold us up like other research centers probably would have during a pandemic, which was great. You can see the baseline characteristics here of the women, the 15 women with LAM that were enrolled. The age, the time since diagnosis. 2 of these women had TSC LAM. Everybody else was sporadic. The supplemental O2 use, you can see there was just 2 participants, and that was with exercise, not at rest. And then you can see their FEV1 % predicted value there. And I will point out too, we had all but 1 patient complete, and 1 person dropped out for reasons that weren't related to the study. So a pretty, really solid completion rate as well. So the first question you always should ask when you're looking at an exercise study is, did participants actually do the program, right? And with studies where it involves a pill, it's not as difficult to get adherence, because you pop a pill, as a study where the intervention is requires a commitment to, daily or almost daily exercise. So it really was, it really is exciting to see the high adherence that we had. If you have looked ever at exercise studies, training intervention studies, adherence is always the Achilles heel, and patient or large exercise trials, unfortunately can readily fail because they can't get their study participants to actually do it. So I think that our amazing participants and our study staff that were really right on it to provide constant encouragement, and as well the ease of the mobile health program and the ease of the home program that was provided to them. I think all of those factors helped to keep our adherence nice and high. As you can see here, to the aerobic and to the resistance programs was quite good. And that's based on the number of minutes achieved out of the expected number of minutes for these exercise programs at the intensity that we prescribed to them. We tracked their accelerometer activity monitor data, so their Fitbit data, using a software program by Fitabase that I'm not showing you all of the ways they report data. I just have one picture here of it where they basically lay it out for every single day and every single week, how much time a person spent in sedentary time versus moderate and vigorous physical activity. And we can get that both as time spent in each category based on their algorithms, or we can get the raw, what we call metabolic equivalence. So the raw METs minutes is the term for that. And you'll see it on some upcoming slides where we look at the intensity and time of exercise and really get an idea of what people were doing with their physical activity. Not just, steps, for example, but like what exercise they were actually doing. With our adherence, I also do want to point out, super gold star. You saw that list of participants. High five them at any chance you can, because 9 out of 14 achieved greater than 90% adherence to that aerobic program. 4 of them greater than 95% adherence. That's amazing. So great work, gold star, and really appreciate that commitment to the program. Now, despite that participation in a regular home exercise program, where these workout sessions gradually lengthened as they went from week 1 to week 12, we got the time of a session gradually worked up at a given intensity level, a target heart rate zone. That did not increase their daily ratings of shortness of breath or their daily ratings of fatigue over 12 weeks, which is an important thing to point out, because I've already opened this talk by saying, one of the reasons we wanted to do this is fatigue is a common complaint in women with LAM. So to track that every day was important to me and see if there was any, any relationship there between would fatigue, report of fatigue increase as individuals exercised more, and introduce that potentially, tiring activity to their already full days. So we also, I'm showing on this slide what I just told you about that daily fatigue. So this is just showing what those values were in their self-reported daily fatigue, from none to very much. And you can see that line stays fairly steady, maybe a dip down here, but a non-significant, change over those 12 weeks. So didn't get aggravated by the exercise intervention, which is great, nor did their shortness of breath that they reported every day. But as I said, their total amount of workout that they perform over the 12 weeks gradually goes up because we gradually increased their time of their sessions. But when you express their intensity of exercise, so how hard they were exercising during those workouts, that stayed fairly constant, which makes sense because we gave them a target zone that was based on their initial exercise test and also symptom guided as well. And you'll see coming up how we would adjust that program based on device information. What I put here in red is just to give you some idea of how hard, if you don't look at METs data much, you'd look at this and have no idea what 6 METs is, right? Is that hard? Is that easy? During the cardiopulmonary exercise test, so some of you have done this, maybe with Dr. Moss out at the NIH, have done this, know how hard this is. This is where you push yourself as hard as you can go on a treadmill or on a bike. And this is the maximum METs, or intensity of exercise, that's achieved by our study subjects, both in the beginning and at the end. And that's shown in red, basically, so you can see how that relates to their workout level. So clearly, you know, you don't, when you're exercising for 30 or 45 minutes, you're not going all out that whole time, right? So you can see that is lower. But again, important point from this slide is that we didn't have an increase in daily ratings of shortness of breath or fatigue over those 12 weeks that were gradually lengthened workout sessions at a steady workload. We also, I think this is a good time to insert a slide from last year. So I showed you the slide last year, which was just that there is a published study indicating that patients with LAM are less physically active. And this was back in 2016 in thorax. And this was where activity monitoring was used to capture this information for individuals with chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, COPD, individuals with LAM, and healthy matched controls. And when expressed as steps per day, daily physical activity, or log minutes of moderate activity, across the board, the LAM patients had a lower value than COPD and healthy. And so, you know, the conclusion of those authors is that, you know, we really need to see what are ways we could increase physical activity in LAM. So it's probably relevant to point out that in our study, we did, at least in terms of steps per day, we didn't quite calculate the way they did. So I couldn't add graphs here, but I could at least show you in terms of steps per day, the study subjects with LAM during our UW exercise study were achieving steps per day that were close to healthy controls. So we really were getting them nice and active. And then the last thing I'll say about this section is that I said this was a pilot study, really to look at feasibility and usefulness. And a big part of feasibility is, do people like it enough? Do participants like it enough and feel like it's something that benefits them and that they want to continue doing to make this whole thing even worth trying to apply to, you know, everybody? And so that's why we had a number of measures in there where we could try to assess this feasibility. And one of them is shown here, which is just an exit survey of a scale between strongly disagree and strongly agree on questions related to these categories that you see here. So I won't read through all of them, but it's basically things like, how feasible did you think, you know, your walking program was? Did you like your devices? Did that monitoring facilitate your exercise? You know, really high here on did this home exercise program, and that's what HEP is, home exercise program, did that lead me to take an active interest in my fitness status and active self-management? And do you plan to keep up your home program? That's another big question mark after exercise studies is, okay, you do the study and this is all great, but will people actually keep it up in the long run? Will this be, is it possible for this to be part of somebody's life? And so participants did indicate good agreement in those domains. So based on those feasibility and satisfaction indicators, as well as others, we said that this program really did seem this mobile health program did seem highly feasible. All right, so now let's look at some other data. And I'm starting with some data that speaks to quality of life and to fatigue, because I said that one of the reasons we launched this was to look at this problem of fatigue in LAM and the exercise impact. Because in individuals without disease and in other patient populations, regular exercise it has been shown to reduce some, perception of fatigue and feelings of fatigue. So decided this would be a good thing to really focus in on with this study. And you can see from these graphs, and these are set up as the initial visit versus the final visit. So initial was before they did the exercise intervention, final is after. For their ratings of quality of life, we had a significant improvement pre to post. And these individual lines are the individual study subjects' values. So you can see those as little dots and then a line to their final testing dot, okay? For their fatigue assessment, we used a couple different fatigue inventories, and these are standardized tools, survey tools, in the literature available, used in other populations, patient populations, and in some cases in healthy populations, to look at fatigue and the impact of different interventions on fatigue, okay? And so it breaks it down to a number of different types of fatigue. And one of the things we saw was that fatigue, both as general fatigue did go down. And you can see that as a significant value, as well as fatigue when it was specifically the physical fatigue. So the questions related to fatigue that were particularly identifying physical activity related fatigue. And that was true both on the multi-dimensional fatigue inventory and the situational fatigue scale, which again is just another standardized survey tool for fatigue. So it looks like we had a positive impact of the exercise intervention on quality of life and on reducing fatigue, which is great. Next major result is that it looks like we improved our exercise tolerance, particularly our submaximal exercise performance, measured by 6-minute walk test. In 6-minute walk test, the number one thing you look at, of course, is the distance that's covered, right, in that 6 minutes. And I laugh because I'm explaining this to you, and this group knows 6-minute walk test quite well. And this 6-minute walk test here is showing, again, individual values for individual study participants, individual LAM study participants, pre and post. And we see there's a significant improvement in pre to post, and that mean change is reported down here as mean plus or minus standard deviation. In addition to that, I'm showing you the heart rate at the end of the test. And the heart rate at the end of the test, you can see, was significantly higher, or heart rate at the end of the test for the final test was higher than the heart rate at the end of the test for the initial test. So there was some increased effort there, at least effort as demonstrated by an increased heart rate. And this is tremendously variable, though. And one of the reasons I like showing the individual study subjects rather than just bars with the means is because I think this variability is important to point out, where some people have a tremendous improvement, some people have pretty much stayed the same, right? So the same effect doesn't apply to everybody. And it's really important that you recognize that's true of all studies, really, that you've got people who, and this is definitely true in exercise studies, you have, extreme responders and less extreme responders. We also have quite a variability in that initial, 6-minute walk test distance. It wasn't all people that had pretty high values. It wasn't all people that had values that were on the lower side. We had quite a spread of abilities. So then these last two graphs, I want to point out to you that despite this improved distance covered and this, increased effort here on this 6-minute walk test, how much shortness or how much oxygen desaturation they had. So how much their oxygen saturation, what their value was at the end of the test was not significantly different between the baseline and final. As you can see there, nor was their perception of that shortness of breath at the end of the test. So, you know, when you've done a 6-minute walk test, you probably remember they'll ask you, frequently will ask you, how hard were you working? How hard, what is your shortness of breath? So that Borg scale rating of dyspnea is what we're capturing here. And again, even though there was an increased distance covered, there wasn't an increase in shortness of breath reported with the 6-minute walk test. Now, what about lung function? Well, our indicators of lung function, at least in terms of our pulmonary function tests, do not indicate that lung function improved with exercise training. And you, I know, are familiar with these common pulmonary function test measures, and there's of course many more that we can include here, but I just included some popular ones. So your FVC, your FEV1, and then your FEV1, so how much you can blow out in a second, as a percent predicted based on your age and your gender and some other variables, but also when expressed relative to what your overall forced vital capacity is. And you can see across the board on these, as well as other parameters on pulmonary function testing, there was not a difference in between pre and post testing. Again, though, I provided the individual values so you could see we really did have a nice spread of what we call, as a researcher, we call it heterogeneity, meaning we wanted, and with a pilot study, it's nice to have a representation of individuals that are more severely afflicted and less severely afflicted. So, you know, with a pilot study, you can really see, is it, one group that may benefit more than others. So it was nice to have that spread. And again, though, in terms of impact on lung function by the exercise intervention in pulmonary function tests, no significant difference there. And then also this is true when we report this relative to the findings on the cardiopulmonary exercise test. So the Maximal exercise test, you know, where they're on the treadmill and they're wearing the little snorkel-like device. Some of you may have had the fun of experiencing this. Those that were in the study, of course, do. But even outside of that, you may have done this, where those gases that are expired from your mouth, so you're exhaling, that's collected and those are analyzed. And that allows us, one of the calculations that allows us to come up with is what a person's maximal consumption of oxygen is, maximal rate of oxygen consumption is. And so, as you can see, our pre and post value were very similar for that pre and post testing, as well as the maximal amount of time that they could be on the treadmill. Because those of you who have done it know, unlike the 6-minute walk test where it's at your own pace, a cardiopulmonary exercise test is a ramped protocol where you go every few minutes, a harder speed and or incline. And it keeps getting harder and harder and harder until you wave your white flag and say no more. So this time to VO2 max is that waving of the white flag saying no more. And that also is not improved with an exercise intervention. Also not different is how high that heart rate was at the very, very end of the treadmill test. So that maximal exertion, what the heart rate was able to achieve, is also not changed by an exercise intervention, and nor is how much their oxygen saturation changed, and both change and what I'm showing here, which is what their absolute value was at the end of the test, also was similar between pre and post. And you can see quite a spread of values, though, with individuals who desaturate much more than others who don't desaturate at all. What else was I going to show you about this? Well, because I just finished showing you about lung function not changing, it's really not a surprise that their maximal aerobic capacity isn't changed, because most of the patients were what we call respiratory limited, where really it's the lung function impairment that's limiting their ability to achieve higher maximal exercise. All right, So now we'll move into the second by second heart rate and oxygen saturation data during the home exercise sessions. I personally, of all of the data I'm showing you out of this study, it's the data I'm the most excited about because it's really the most novel in that nobody has reported oxygen saturation during a home exercise program in a patient population that actually desaturates, over time like this. So really, from a feasibility standpoint, I'm excited to see, that we could do it. But also, I think the information that it tells us about feeling good about giving people home programs and the best approach to take, I think that it's important that we are making these kinds of measures. To remind you, we did this measurement of second by second heart rate and oxygen saturation during those home aerobic exercise sessions. So where they were going out for their 30 to 45 minute walk, bicycle ride, whatever it is. Most people did walking because it's very much easier to control the intensity and stay within your target heart rate zone, and also to keep the fingertip pulse oximeter on and reading. Walking was the primary exercise mode used. And then I want to show you, before I show you the data from everybody, I wanted to show you just what an example of the second by second record would look like from a participant with LAM. Where the blue line, well, first I'll show you, this is the exercise session. This is clock time. I can't remember if this one's 30 minutes or 45 minutes. And it's showing, from time of just starting exercise. So just stepping onto that treadmill or just getting going. And the red line is showing heart rate. So heart rate, and it's described on this axis over here. So of course, as exercise increases or as exercise starts, our heart rate goes up, right? And it goes up until we're in or close to that target range where we're trying to get and trying to push into a target heart rate range or an adjusted target heart rate range, which I'll talk about in a minute. And as that intensity, as that person increases their intensity, that heart rate will rise. As they drop their intensity, that heart rate will go down. As they increase their intensity again, it goes up. So those of you who have used your Fitbits or Apple Watches or whatever to look at your heart rate when you're exercising, this, right? Your heart rate will go up and it'll go down depending on what kind of intensity you're doing. What we tracked at the same time and on the same clock record was this oxygen saturation. So this is shown on the left axis. This is pulse oximetry, provided our percent oxygen saturation values. So high at rest, and then as this individual began exercising, the oxygen saturation values dropped down, kind of steadied out here around 90. As the exercise intensity was going up, though, as you see by this red line, you see an inverse relationship there with oxygen saturation starting to dip lower and lower, recognizing that going lower, dropping heart rate, bringing oxygen saturation up again. Okay, this is looking okay. Start increasing intensity again. See oxygen saturation starting to dip again. And so sort of these adjustments that patients would make to keep this oxygen saturation from dipping too low, and also above all is guided by symptoms. So how they feel was very important, and making sure to make adjustments based on any symptoms. So the main point I wanted to make with this is just, second by second record, and that it's an inverse relationship here. As you see heart rate go up in individuals that desaturate with exercise, that oxygen saturation value will dip down. And I'll point out that for this particular subject who definitely did have exercise oxygen desaturation, a target heart rate range based only on her cardiopulmonary exercise test what's called a Carbonin calculation, where we calculate heart rate reserve and then use a percentage of that. That would have put her target heart rate range right about here, 150, 160 range. As you can see, she doesn't take her heart rate up into that range. And the reason for that is because we observed this during exercise testing, that her oxygen saturation would really dip down as she reached these higher intensities. So we adjusted her target heart rate range based on one that would allow her to achieve as high a possible intensity without dipping uncomfortably low in oxygen saturation. So this was really where it's a tailored situation for each patient, for each individual. Now, what do we do with that data? So you can imagine we have this kind of record for every single exercising patient over the 12 weeks. So 12 weeks, every single person, that's a lot of numbers, right? A lot of numbers. And really the worst thing we could have done is only calculate what the average SpO2 was during a workout. Because of course, the times that are higher are going to cancel out the times that are lower. And you're really not getting a good reflection of what's happening during that individual's session. So a better approach was to put in data like this, and it's just like we do with things like, analyzing glucose changes during exercise, is to look at things like area under the curve, or in our case, we did a frequency analysis where we binned the data into how much time a person spent during that 30 or 45-minute workout, how much time they spent with no desaturation, so greater than 95% SpO2, versus at the other extreme, how much time they spent in our very severe category of desaturation, so lower than 78% SpO2. And then the zones in between are reflecting SpO2s in between those. So 90, 95, 84, 89, and 78, 83. And by doing this, then we could capture for any given patient what their week-long exercise regimen looked like. So for this particular study participant, in week 3, you can see how much time she spent. So this is like a pie graph, right? It's of 100%, how much time she spent in severe desaturation, very low. She spent none in very severe. Spent a fair bit of time in moderate, though, as you see there in purple, and some time in mild and very little time in no desaturation. So this is during her, not all the time. Again, this is just during her 30 to 45-minute exercise session, and putting those 4 workouts together for the week. And the nice thing about doing that is then we could take for every given study participant, we could look at what they looked like from week 1 all the way through to week 12. Did the amount of purple change? Did the amount of red, no desaturation, did that change? And so it's a nice visual, a quick snapshot, but then we can also use these values to put together some means and standard deviations for the whole group. So this is what this graph is showing here. When we look at the whole group together and what % of exercise session time they spent in those different zones, you can see they actually spent the majority of their exercise session times in this mild desaturation zone of 90 to 95% SpO2. But not an insignificant amount of time in this moderate, this moderate of 84 to 89% SpO2. But, pretty decent amount where there was none. And not surprising, because we instructed patients, and we also drove home the importance of letting symptoms guide what you were doing. People weren't spending very much time at all in the severe or very severe category. In fact, not even 1%, less than 0.5% here in very severe. So that's good news. Question I got asked a lot is this going to improve over time? well, is it going to get worse, or is it going to get better, or is it going to not change at all? And the answer is, it looks like for these individuals, when we captured this both as, week 1 all the way to week 12 and running that as what we call repeated measures ANOVA. So every single measure over that whole 12-month or 12-week period, no significant change. For simplicity here, I show it to you as 1 month, 2 month, and 3 month, but no statistically significant change in how much time they spent in their different zones. So mild desaturation tended to stay right around that bar that I showed you already. Moderate desaturation tended to stay right around, a little under 20% of time, and no desaturation there. So with the exercise intervention, that really didn't change. I'm not surprised by that, because their workout intensity was kept constant or fairly constant, and their lung function didn't improve. So both of those variables together are what's going to be most important for these oxygen saturation values. So if we didn't change the intensity and we didn't change the lung function, it makes sense that that we also didn't change how much a person desaturates over time. It stayed consistent. The last things I'll say about that are that our amount of time that was spent in that more severe desaturation was related to how much they desaturated during their 6-minute walk test and their other exercise test, their maximal treadmill test. In other words, if they were going to desaturate badly during their home program, we were going to see it, and did see it in their exercise testing in the lab. It also related, as you'd expect, to their lung function. So their measures of FEV1, FEC, FEV1 over FEC, all of those showed a strong negative relationship. So the worse the lung function was, the more likely they were to spend some time in that more severe desaturation zones. And then also it related to how much they actually liked the program. And if they spent more time in these higher zones of desaturation, they had slightly lower, but statistically lower numbers related to, whether they would plan to keep it up and how they felt about it. So the preliminary conclusions, and I say preliminary because we really just finished testing our last subject only in September. So it's pretty fresh here, the data, but we're analyzing it as quickly as possible. And what is clear now is what is shown on this slide, that at least preliminarily what we see is that an mHealth directed exercise regimen is feasible when we move LAM. And despite no impact on lung function, increases exercise tolerance and improves psychometric quality of life and fatigue indicators. So similar to what we saw with the randomized controlled trial that I showed to you at the very beginning with the Brazil group. Even with exercise prescribed relative to aerobic fitness and heart rate and symptom guided, mild to moderate oxygen desaturation is common in LAM and does not change with or impair tolerance for the home exercise. And then the oxygen saturation response to the 6-minute walk test and the cardiopulmonary exercise test done in the clinic might be useful to identify patients that desaturate to a greater extent when performing their home exercise program. So you can actually identify who those people are that may have more trouble with exercise desaturation during their home program, because it will show up in their, their clinic 6-minute walk test. And then the last point to make here is on the topic of the skeletal muscle picture in LAM. So as you remember, I said that we wanted to investigate skeletal muscle in LAM and the relationship to indicators of exercise intolerance and fatigue. And it's important to look at this because when we consider exercise intolerance and fatigue in LAM, our mind first goes to the cardiopulmonary contributions to that. But what is also an important contributor to exercise intolerance and fatigue are musculoskeletal. in individuals without disease and in individuals with many different cardiopulmonary disorders. Musculoskeletal sources of contributions to their exercise intolerance is well documented. So this is why I and others really wanted to take a look at this in LAM, because nobody had done this yet at all. So I'll finish with just some preliminary data that we've done related to the skeletal muscle in LAM. What we've done is we've performed strength and fatigue assessment in the individuals with LAM, as I've already shown you, but we brought in, and I requested sort of an addendum to the protocol to be able to do this, and the LAM Foundation provided some additional monies to support this so that we could bring in some healthy matched, what we call controls, healthy matched controls. So they're women without LAM of similar age and physical activity status, height and weight, you know, all the kind of typical things you match for. And we had them run the gamut of strength and fatigue testing. So the physical tests that were performed in the lab, and also the surveys related to fatigue. So I'll show you what a little of that data looked like with the LAM shown in, of course, pink, and the matched healthy control shown in green. And this is pictured here, and the data is showing one of the computerized dynamometry tests where it was a test of muscular endurance of the quadriceps. So it was a hold test at a percentage of a person's max voluntary contraction and their ability to control that within a range. And we saw that a significantly lower ability for that in LAM compared to their matched controls, and also in some force platform testing that we did with jump testing, and what amount of force could be generated when expressed, you know, relative to their body weight. And there was a significant difference there as well. The psychometric surveys, so the ones that I've already told you about that are, you know, standardized tools for assessing fatigue in, you know, patient populations, and we used them here in LAM. The indicators for physical fatigue on both the MFI and the SFS surveys were highly significantly different between LAM and healthy control, with the physical fatigue reported, and same with the category of general fatigue. That one happens to only be measured on MFI. But importantly, when you look at the other types of fatigue, so one of them is mental fatigue, that's also captured on these surveys, there was no difference between LAM and the healthy control. So it really does look to be focused on this physical, nor was it on any of the what are called motivation indicators in those standardized surveys. So I think that's really telling that we should explore, you know, both this slide, this data, and this data, I think does encourage that we need to take a look at skeletal muscle for a potential, what we call phenotype, or a potential disease-related impact on skeletal muscle strength or endurance, or both. Oh, and this slide as well. So this was in addition to just doing the computerized dynamometry, we did some timed functional endurance tests. So some of you may have tried this before, you know, a timed wall squat test. They're miserable. And I know that I can't see the screen, but I'm sure that the participants in the study are like, oh yeah, that was terrible. And a timed core strength test, you know, those also were significantly worse in LAM compared to their healthy matched controls. So all of that indicates that, you know, we really should take a look at, and I'm glad we did, collect blood. And we collected, most importantly, muscle biopsies from individuals. We were able to get biopsies from almost all the individuals with LAM. And we got about half of our, maybe a little over half, this number could be higher, of samples from the quad of our healthy matched controls as well. And so what we'll use, and we haven't run any of these assays yet, so I can't share any data with you. We took a piece of quadricep muscle. Here's my leg, because we did some trial work on my leg. That's just a little, like a couple days later. So it's really a tiny incision. But we took a piece of muscle about the size of this part of this eraser, as you can see here. So it's quite small, but it's enough to be able to get some good histology and also run some other assays that will tell us about the metabolic, what we call the metabolic machinery in skeletal muscle. So the machinery related to how well we can actually generate ATP, so our energy that we need for muscles to be able to perform. So we'll look at some of those things. There's lots of different assays we can do, and that's what we'll be rolling out the final about 6 or 7 months worth of work to do. And we'll look at those both pre and post exercise training for LAM, because we actually collected biopsies both before and after their exercise training intervention. So that'll be an important comparison to see is, how did exercise training impact what we saw in skeletal muscle? But also we'll be able to compare non-LAM, versus LAM tissue. Lastly, and I promise this is it, there's something else, 2 other small things that we're doing that are kind of spin-offs of this study that we just felt that had to be done. So we went ahead and put in for some additional internal monies really to pay for this. And this is surrounding the problem of the pulse oximeter for exercise. It became clear with the LAM study, exercise study, and with the study that we're conducting of exercise in individuals with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis right now, that pulse oximeters really aren't designed well for good ease of use during exercise. The ones that are used in the clinic, very often the forehead probes during a cardiopulmonary exercise test, those are are great, but we don't have those available for our home exercise regimens. So we really thought this would be an important thing to look at. And I want to introduce Claire Child, who is in my lab as a PhD student, but she's a doctor of physical therapy and a master's in public health, very talented cardiopulmonary specialist in PT, who began working with the tail end of the LAM study and particularly became interested in our monitoring of oxygen saturation in LAM and in IPF, where she's doing most of her work these days, and how we can measure this during exercise testing with these devices in patient populations that actually desaturate, like LAM and IPF, and how those devices compare. So she submitted a small grant proposal to get this funded by an internal agency at UW, and she's doing this right now. She included some LAM in this, but as I said, it's a lot of IPF right now. And we're looking at how the biometrics that are provided for us on these different devices, like heart rate, the appearance of dysrhythmias, which, as you know, Apple Watch is advertising that like crazy, as well as their new oxygen, the Series 6 oxygen saturation capability that they are advertising now. She's measuring how well these biometrics look compared to each other when we're sensing it at the fingertip with a couple different types of devices, the Fitbit, the Apple Watch with the Series 6, where we can measure these oxygen saturation and dysrhythmias, and as well our values related to the readability of that signal, so the pulse amplitude index. And she's studying this during exercise testing, so not at rest, but actually during cardiopulmonary exercise testing. So that data is helping to inform our other prong to this, which is to design and prototype an oximeter, pulse oximeter that's optimized for exercise regimens. So, defining what are the fallbacks, both from the reliability, validity standpoint of our output, but also the user experience, which is so important, because if people are going to measure oxygen saturation during home programs. And if we think that's important to do, we've got to figure out a way to make these pulse oximeters better for exercising with. And so I had the great fortune to team up with some talented bioengineers in the Department of Bioengineering here at UW, who have taken this on as a volunteer project. They're actually, it's all volunteer, part of a Masters of Applied Bioengineering project that will go on for a whole year, where a team of bioengineering graduate students are dedicated to this problem right here, which is so neat. Because I know nothing about bioengineering, or next to nothing about bioengineering. So I am not the one to do this. Claire and I recognize the huge need, but we aren't the ones to actually try to design a better pulse oximeter for exercise. These bioengineers are the ones to do it, and they've taken this on as a year-long project. And this is where I'm going to solicit you, because in addition to all the comparisons between different devices that we'll do during exercise, and really figuring out what are the fallbacks, a big piece is the user experience, and only you can provide that user experience to us. And I know from looking at your, hearing about your chats and the conversations in social media, and just what people have told me, study subjects have told me, and other people have told me about their frustration of different pulse oximeters. I know that many of you have an opinion about how to improve, or your current frustrations. Maybe you don't know how to improve it, but what are your current frustrations? So we have a nice survey put together. It's being IRB approved right now, and we'll be ready to send out to you, I believe, within a week. So what I'm going to ask you to do, if you would, is Shar, I think, is going to be the one to put up a participation poll. And if you are interested at all in just providing some input on that survey, it will be something that you click on a link, and it will have you answer a bunch of questions about your experience with pulse oximetry during exercise. And that's it. And I can't remember the length of time it takes, but it's pretty short, just a few minutes. So if you'd be willing to do that, go ahead and provide that input. And in addition to knowing, numbers, so we have an idea of how many people, I will also like to have that email address or name or something. So Shar, I don't know if you set that part up in the poll.
Yep, the poll is up, and what we'll be able to do, and Julie, correct me if I'm wrong, I know if you probably muted there, but we should be able to pull that list for you, Beth.
Awesome.
And the names,
yes
or no.
We'll send it out. We'll send it out through, Pulmonary Hypertension Association and Pulmonary Fibrosis Foundation and LAM Foundation, of course. We'll send it out generally like that, but it's so much better to target these things to people who have said, hey, I'll do it, So that's great. Thank you very much.
Responses are rolling in, so.
Yes, they are. And no surprise, there's so many yeses. You guys are awesome. All right, and so why can't I progress? Okay, so I want to finish by thanking the tremendous team that made this all happen. The patient benefit grant from the LAM Foundation is what financially supported this. So it wouldn't have happened without them trusting that we could do it. I had not worked in LAM before, so they really did have to trust me that I could pull off what I said I was going to do. So I appreciate their trust there and their tremendous support. And can't thank enough the study participants who have selflessly gave their time and blood and sweat and muscle to be in this study. So thank you, thank you, thank you. You all are amazing. And then the groups here at UW that made this happen, with very small exception, really we had one hired study coordinator, Morgan Kelly, who did a tremendous job leading this study. The day-to-day operations of this study was Morgan Kelly. Morgan has since left the lab just recently, sniff, sniff, but for great reason. She got into a PhD program in California, and I'm so excited for her. She's going to do tremendous things, and we might be able to bring her back into LAM research later. So this is a big thanks to you, Morgan. I don't know if you're on because there's so many people I can't see, but thank you so much. Beyond that, one hired role, everybody else you see here was volunteer. The doctor of physical therapy students donated their time to do all of the data, all of the coaching, the data collection, all of that was involved in this. They took on and did it enthusiastically. I want to point out Paul Kim, because he came in at the second half of the study, and he's the one who drove that key piece of bringing in healthy controls. He recruited every one of those and did all of the testing on all of those healthy control subjects. That was really his baby. And he spent a year of his life while he's a grad student doing that. So I really appreciate that so much, Paul. And then our other DPT students, Haley, Julie, and Missy, who also were key players in the day-to-day data collection on this study. Our two physicians on this study, Dr. Lynch and Dr. Ho, both gave their time to be present at every single study visit, because we were doing maximal exercise testing, and we needed to have one of them there. And so they were amazing to do that, to donate their time for that, as well as Dr. Dash in urology, who did a lot of our muscle biopsies and trained study staff at the Fred Hutch to be able to continue with those muscle biopsies. So that was, again, time that he donated, and I really appreciate that. So exercise in LAM, what do we know now? I hope I've given you a little bit more, but like anything, the more you learn, the more questions you have. And I know we probably can't address all of them in this this online session, but I'm happy to take any right now that I can. So that is it. Should I stop share, or how should we do this, Hallie or Shar?
Yeah, I think you'd go ahead and stop share. Yeah,
Okay.
Yep, we'll go ahead and stop share. Beth, thank you so much. And Hallie, I think you've got a good list of questions to go from there.
Yes.
And, yeah, if we
First of all, wow, that was so much information.
Yeah.
I can't believe all the information you were able to gather and what you were able to put together from that information. So thank you, thank you.
Thanks, Hallie.
And a huge thank you to the bioengineer team that are willing to donate their time.
Isn't that awesome?
That's just like, that makes me teary, because
I know.
it's so thoughtful of them. So thank you, thank you.
No, come on.
Some of them may be on because I invited them to be on. I'm not sure if they were able to or not, but I'll make sure to pass on that message.
Wonderful, thank you. I did try and keep track of some of the questions as we were going through. I'm sure I won't get to all of them in this format, but if I don't answer or address your question towards the end of my list, then please raise your hand or put your name back in the chat, and we will try to address it. So one of the first questions that came up was, how much O2 did the two people use that were in the study that used O2?
Yeah, I could pull that up really quickly. I got it recorded here. I'm at my office computer, but I don't know that would make really good sense of the time usage right now.
Okay.
So if you will put in the chat your email, I can send you that.
Okay, so the person that asked that question, the person that asked that question, is it fair for me to say that I was one of the people that used oxygen?
I was about to say, I think both people are on this. So if you want to speak up, that would save a lot of time from me going into the files and telling you what it was.
Okay.
Yes.
I actually don't remember what setting I had it on. I had to use my home machine. My portable machines were not sufficient. And it was important to me not to go PAP any lower than 85. It just, my head hurt. I just didn't feel well. I shook. So I was probably using 3 or 4 liters of continuous oxygen, and I was riding my bicycle, and I was able to stay in all the ranges that I was asked to stay in if I used that much oxygen. But I desat really quickly. And so we'd agreed that that was appropriate for myself. I don't know the other person that used oxygen. And I have no idea if they're there.
That would be me.
Okay, I was going to say, I do know who it is, but.
Yeah, I'll come out. So I was on an Inogen on setting 3, and it probably wasn't enough. I needed more. I was still desatting more than I wanted to.
We fought
Okay.
about that, didn't we, Doc? We didn't fight. We had conversations.
Yeah. It's a fine line because you want to do the test as it's set up, but you don't want to desat too low and potentially damage. And so that was
Right.
a tough one.
You're right. It's a fine line. And because, and I think you guys have heard me talk about this before, with exercise, there's a stimulus that has to be reached. There's a stimulus threshold. So you have to exercise at a high enough intensity to achieve those positive adaptations. And if the lung is limiting you so much that you can't achieve that workload because you're desatting so much, that's where, you know, really considering using the supplemental oxygen, even though, you know, you just don't want to. I can so appreciate how, you know, all the barriers to doing that. But that's really the argument for, hey, you know, let's go ahead and use that so you can exercise at a higher intensity and have a more likely chance of achieving that exercise stimulus threshold for positive benefit. Does that make sense?
Yes.
But it's a personal decision that everybody has to make based on, you know, based on everything that goes into how they feel about their oxygen.
Thank you. A follow-up question, or one that works as a follow-up. Is it harmful to go below moderate desaturations?
Yeah, that's a common question and nobody wants to answer it. And the reason nobody wants to answer it is because there isn't a good answer right now. The number one thing that has to guide you are symptoms. So even if you're above 85, but you're starting to be symptomatic, that doesn't mean that you're not at risk. Like, it really does need to be symptom driven. And that's what the physicians here, the pulmonology team here, strongly believe, that more important than a number is what it's telling you symptom wise. And so that's going to be different. For some people do tolerate dipping into, you know, a little bit lower than what other people will tolerate. The long-term consequences of somebody exercising, you know, consistently below a random number, say 85, has not been studied. That's not a study that anybody has done. I would love to figure out a way that we could do that, because I think that would be valuable information to see. I'm particularly interested actually in how the right side of the heart could potentially change because of the well-known effects on oxygen levels and what's happening in the pulmonary vasculature, and thus the load on the right heart. But we can't jump to that being a conclusion without actually being able to study that. So the very convoluted answer was there's not a good answer right now. And above all, symptoms should be guiding what you're allowing those numbers to do.
Okay, another one on the same track. What about using O2 to be able to exercise harder?
Yeah, so that's the counseling that a lot of us, you know, that Claire, Morgan, myself, and the other team were having with patients, both that were in the LAM study and now in the IPF study, is when we see a record come in where those numbers are, you know, they're dipping down. Hey, are you using oxygen, or are you using enough oxygen? Would you please consider trying using oxygen or more oxygen so that you can achieve closer to that higher threshold, that higher intensity, to get to reap the benefit. And I keep coming back to that threshold because all of the data on exercise training effects are dose dependent. God, it would be great if they weren't, right? I mean, if I could just get up and, you know, walk down the hall and then I've exercised today, I'm done. That would be fantastic. It's not. It depends on dose, just like other treatments do. And part of dose, an important part of dose is not only frequency, but intensity. So that's where every person has to make that decision of, you know, if I'm to the point where I'm not achieving a high enough workload, would it behoove me to use oxygen to be able to do that? So.
Okay, thank you. A little bit different. Did the lung function improve with the healthy controls? Like you noted that ours didn't improve.
You mean with exercise training? No, the healthy controls didn't perform an exercise training intervention.
Okay.
Yeah, they were used purely, I should have made that more clear. They were used purely for that comparison between LAM and healthy on those, initial strength tests and survey tests about fatigue and all that. Yeah, there's really no reason to put a healthy group through this program, because there's a wealth of literature on mobile health exercise interventions set up just as we have done with healthy populations, and the stimulus that we provided would provide the same outcomes that we saw in terms of improvement in muscular strength, endurance, and exercise performance. So
thank you. So a follow-up to that, when you published the graph earlier that showed heart rate going up, SATs going down, leveling out a bit, then up and down again.
Yeah.
When you look at a healthy control group, do they desat sort of at the same percentage?
Yeah, no. So healthy controls don't desat during exercise, unless, and let me first point out, they didn't do an exercise intervention. We didn't do any exercise testing, cardiopulmonary exercise testing on the healthy controls. There was no reason to.
Right.
We purely did that's for the muscle piece. Okay. But what's known about individuals without lung dysfunction is that with exercise increasing, they are able to maintain normal oxygen saturation, except the very elite athletes, sometimes pushing really, really high cardiac outputs, and also racehorses. That true story. There is some evidence that some people can push themselves to such high intensities in terms of the cardiac output that's being pushed through their lungs, that blood can exit the lungs before all of the hemoglobin is fully saturated. And so for that reason, you can see some exercise-induced desaturation, but again, it's only at the very extremes. It's not a normal response in healthy individuals to desaturate. So.
Okay.
Maybe we're elite athletes. That's it.
You are all athletes.
Oh,
that was Jenny, wasn't it, Jenny?
Yeah.
I think. Was it Jenny?
Disappeared. Here's one that I'm just going to read as posted because I would make a mess of it if I didn't.
Okay.
If I'm taking a beta blocker so that my heart rate rise is blunted, is using a target perceived exertion level and keeping O2 sat above a certain level a reliable and valid method of adjusting intensity? Yeah. And if yes, what O2 sat would be considered a signal to reduce intensity?
Yeah, that's a really great question. So we didn't study, and I'm not familiar with studies specifically on beta blockers and desaturation values being measured during exercise. There's obviously a wealth of literature about beta blockers and prescribing exercise, and that perceived exertion is actually a nice surrogate for that target heart rate zone, that using that can be a good method of achieving the right dose by that exertion, that perceived exertion, with some training. I mean, there's some patient education involved in how you teach somebody what they should be looking for. Now, the question of oxygen saturation is going to come back to you, though, or come back to the same thing that I just said, where symptom guided is number one still, and that value on the pulse oximeter should still read consistently or normally. It shouldn't be affected by the fact that your heart rate response is altered during that exercise regimen. You should still see. So I wouldn't say that there was any adjustment that had to be made in terms of how you look at that number, but certainly the target heart rate zone is not the choice of guiding exercise intensity. You would then go for perceived exertion, and just balancing that out with what that value is on your pulse oximeter. But again, more importantly, what your symptoms are.
Right. Thank you. Another one I'm just going to read to you. I'm curious if you looked at whether there's any correlation with those who experience muscle fatigue and their lung function measures. That is, are there individuals who desat more? Do they also experience more fatigue? Yeah.
So we did run those numbers because we have all of that survey data, and we have the subjective, and we have the muscle values. And right now, and again, we have not finished all the analysis, but everything that I've ran so far doesn't show a significant correlation between the reported fatigue that individuals had and how much fatigability they had in their muscle tests. But I want to caution and say that with small numbers like we have, we're not powered well for these types of correlations. So we can look at them as a point of interest, is there something there? But we can't say for sure that it's not a relationship that exists just because we don't see it in this study, because we have such a relatively small N, 15 people basically to judge it on. Does that make sense? So in my mind, it was one of the first things I wanted to look at, because yeah, it makes sense to me that somebody that reports more, feeling of fatigue, some of the fatigue, and many of you may appreciate this or have experienced this. Some of the women would say things like, I get my arms up to blow dry my hair, and just the roll brush and the hair dryer and being up there, and I just can't do it like I could, and just that. And so that's really a muscle fatigue sounding problem. So I can't really say much about it until we run, the assays and get more information, which I'm excited to be able to do. And maybe this time next year, this is what I will sit here and be talking to you about, is the results of those assays. And if we do see something there, I think it will warrant investigating it in a much larger number, a much larger group of participants.
Thank you. So one of the questions was tentative release date for the muscle information, and where will we see it?
Yeah. So all of this, right, will come out. This is kind of informal dissemination that I'm doing now, but all of this will be formally disseminated in a publication. Whether I'll put this stuff out before the muscle stuff, I haven't decided yet. I'm actually trying to figure that out right now, whether what I have now is a complete enough story to submit as a manuscript to a journal, or whether we hold off a little bit and get the rest of the story with the muscle stuff. There's lots of different strategies to that. Regardless, you will see it in print, and when it is in print, we'll make sure that you are notified about that. I'm sure the LAM Foundation, I imagine that you're used to posting, available new literature, right? to community, right? So I don't think there'll be any way you won't know about it. And those assays really are just a matter of time of conducting them. Some of them get sent away. Some of them get performed right here on my bench over there. So it's just a little bit of time. My goal is to get these done in 6 months, though. So.
Do you have a premonition, a feeling, a sense of what you're going to find? Not my question, someone else's.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I don't know, other than if I would just take a guess, since the data is pointing towards muscle fatigability, and an impairment in that, not so much brute force, but more the endurance of that muscle. I would suspect we may see some metabolic machinery impacted. It's possible. Now, what we don't know still, though, is whether that would be as a primary consequence of the disease, which is what you see. We see this actually in COPD. We see this there's evidence of it in CF. There's evidence of it in pulmonary arterial hypertension, IPF. So whether that's a potential consequence of the primary disease or whether it's a secondary consequence, we won't have a great grasp of it, but of course we'll look for as many indicators as we can to give us those clues. So that's another reason I'm happy I pulled blood from you, those of you who are the participants, you remember, that will also be the opportunity to look at some biomarkers related to systemic inflammation, which can impact skeletal muscle health.
Thank you.
Yeah.
What symptoms of O2 saturation do you need not to push past or ignore? So what are the things that are important to pay attention to?
Yeah, so I put together a nice, in fact, I think I might have it, nice on my website, my lab's website. Hey, Claire, are you still on? Can you put it in the chat? I don't know if she's still on.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat.
Thank you. You're awesome. So I put together a nice summary of indicators of exercise intolerance, not based on just what I'm saying and what Claire's saying, based on what the literature tells us is the guidelines that we should be providing. And it's all, I like it because it's in one place, quick access. And she'll put that link in there. You can pull that up and hit print and have it for yourself.
Wonderful, thank you.
Sure. Oh,
Any implications or recommendations for folks with an FEV one less than 40%? Does that need to be looked at differently than the other people where the FEV 1% was higher?
Yeah, so while we had a range of participants in terms of lung function, the majority were in the sort of the middle to the road, middle of the road in terms of lung function, and some that were on the higher end. We didn't have a lot that were quite low, so I don't really feel comfortable saying that there's anything out of our data that that points to something that should be done differently, because there's just not enough of it to be able to point to that. Certainly the likelihood that somebody might have indicators of exercise intolerance is going to be higher in individuals with worse lung function. So I think if anything, just stressing the importance of paying attention to your body and not trying to do what you did 5 years ago. We all do that. We're all guilty of trying to do, what the glory days you did. But also, as you know, from your pulmonary function test, it's a progressive disease. So what you did even last year might not be appropriate to the workout this year. So never assuming that it is still okay, and always, paying attention to what your symptoms are telling you.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any patterns of blood pressure changes when we exercise?
We didn't see, in terms of the resting measures of systolic and diastolic blood pressures at baseline and final. There wasn't a big impact on blood pressures, and this group wasn't a hypertensive group. So I really, didn't expect to see a whole lot there. It stayed pretty much the same. Same with body weight too. Boy, it would be wonderful if exercise programs consistently dropped body weight. But as you know, losing weight very much in most individuals, not everybody, but most individuals, is a two-pronged approach of nutrition or diet, appropriate nutrition, combined with physical activity levels going up. And that's tough to do because as you exercise more, many of us do have a tendency to eat more. And so a lot of exercise only studies like ours will typically not show a statistically significant difference in weight loss, for a whole group, where some individuals though may lose some pounds and be pretty happy about that. So. Thank
you. Somebody says that when they go for walks, they know their hands swell. And was that noticed in the study at all?
I don't recall that being reported as a symptom. We kept a record of our phone calls, weekly phone calls, and everything that a patient would say in terms of what they experienced. And I don't recall that being a symptom. One problem we did have, and many of you probably here experienced this as a Raynaud's type of problem, where your perfusion, your blood to those distal extremities, particularly your fingertips, particularly in the cold, will tend to be a bigger problem, particularly if you have some pulmonary circulation involvement in your disease. So that tendency towards that right heart, I don't want to say failure, but challenge to the right side will push somebody towards having more of a problem with that coldness of the fingertips, not really good perfusion. Unfortunately, that makes it hard to get good measures. Those of you may have experienced that it's difficult to get if you use a fingertip pulse oximeter. Which is why our bioengineering team is pretty excited, and a lot of it due to Claire's work in her device comparisons about figuring out something. I'm probably saying too much, but Claire's going to kill me, but figuring out something that maybe we read, a cool, nifty looking headband, that is what we use for reading rather than fingertip, because forehead really does seem to maintain its perfusion better in those conditions of exercise and cold and all of that. So
thank you. And I would like to add that Claire has put the link to the website up in the chat box. It's in blue. So anybody that would like to make note of that, please go ahead and do so.
Great. Yes. Thank you, Claire.
Looking for any questions that I may have missed. There have been a number of questions that are sort of directed more at individual fellow LAMmies, not so much for Beth to address.
Yeah.
And so I'm not tackling those right now. We can answer those in our conversation towards the end.
Yeah, because I think you have a discussion amongst yourselves here too, right?
Yes.
Yeah, great. And all the study participants can be like, "Can you believe she made us do that?" You can feel free to talk about me behind my back.
I do see one more question. Is chest pain reported in association with exercise?
So that's one of the things on the list of exercise intolerance. That's nothing to ignore. That's a really important, yeah.
Thank you.
Please, please be aware of that and bring that to your caregiver's attention.
And do you have a favorite place or program or recommendation for an exercise program for lung people, or is that an individual thing? Go to your local folks for that.
Well, yeah. So here's the, we got to have a next step to this project, right? We got to have a next step. So without saying a whole lot, I'm working on what that next step is right now in the form of a proposal to the LAM Foundation. And that next step would be to hopefully achieve the goal that everybody wants, which is how can we make this available to the entire LAM community in a way that's still has an element of being tailored and is safe, but is still feasible to do. Like it actually is something that's possible. And so that's what I'll call it maybe phase 2 right now is going to focus on. Now I haven't figured it all out yet. That's what my winter break will be, is to really sit down and put pen to paper and sketch out what this could look like. But that's the goal, because that's what everybody wants to know, right? I mean, the study participants got this particular mHealth program that worked really well for them, was tailored for them, but then how do we get this to the next piece where it's widely available? And not just in LAM, but this is why we are conducting a similar study in 30 patients with idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, randomized to a mobile health exercise program versus not, and studying a lot of the same endpoints. And we're studying the oxygen desaturation during exercise, exactly like we did with you all. And we're doing this so that we can really try to make this to everybody that desaturates during exercise, not just LAM. There's a tremendous need, particularly post-COVID, as you've heard. There's going to be even a greater population now that needs this. So,
thank you.
Yeah.
Somebody would like to know if an individual that participated in the study is able to have access to their results.
Oh, definitely. Yes. Oh, definitely. And what we did, and I thought we did it from day one, but we might not have done it for the first few individuals, is gave them a little thing that they took out on their last day. It was sort of their, report card. You could hang this on your refrigerator kind of thing of how you improved, what you did. But I think we didn't catch everybody with that. So if you didn't get that, or if you want more information, you are welcome to see anything that you want related to your data. I'm more than happy. So just reach out to me. You all know my email address. Reach out to me and I'll meet with you. Sound good?
Wonderful. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing anything else pressing. If there's something you think Beth needs to answer, type it in the chat box immediately. Otherwise, I believe that we can release her to go and enjoy her evening. And then we will, Allie, I see your hand up. Is there something you want to say?
Just very quickly, just as one of the participants and someone who had so much fun, can I just say thank you for everything that you did
Of course.
for all of us? I mean, just, you know, the presentation today was incredible, but thank you for your enthusiasm, for just wanting to continue to do this, and for everything that you've done to bring our community together.
Oh, thank you,
Really
Allie.
appreciate it.
That's so wonderful of you to say. And you guys should know, Allie was cheerleader number one on this.
Yes.
She is the reason the study happened. It would not have happened if Allie had not connected me with so many of you wonderful women who then agreed to be in the study. So she was she was participant number one.
Yep.
And really helped us spread the word. So really the thanks back to you, Allie. You're amazing. And Allie is continuing because she lives close. This is the consequence, right? You live close to my lab, you're going to be a guinea pig. Allie lives close enough that she has come back here and done some things where we want to just try something out. So hopefully she'll continue to do that.
Anytime.
Beth, I want to echo that. Misty Lynn here. I was one of those that got caught in COVID limbo, and I got to tell you, at a time that was very scary for many of us, it was just a wonderful focus to have an exercise regimen to pay attention to, and a great team holding us accountable to it and checking in on us throughout. Like that in itself was a blessing. I think my study went to almost 21 weeks because, but hey, that was great. and actually an incredible
well, the fact
treat.
that you hung
thank
in
you.
There, you hung in there, Miss Lynn, which is amazing. You know, some other study participants would have been like, I'm out of here.
As long as I could. We that one ended in the hospital, but not because of all of you. So no, it was seriously just a real tremendous experience to be part of. So thank you.
It's so good to see you again too.
Thank you, Misty Lynn. It really was an incredible experience, and I am thrilled that you were able to complete it.
Yeah.
And the chat box is just full of thank yous, and we are so grateful for everything you do. So we will look forward to staying connected and to phase 2.
Which I'll be recruiting for.
Very exciting, very exciting.
Oh, and I see Morgan there. Morgan, will you please wave to everybody? Morgan's amazing study coordinator.
I'm so sorry for joining late today, but I worked as the study coordinator for this trial and wanted to just add a huge thank you to everyone who participated. We were so blown away by all of the women who were so dedicated to exercise and really made this study possible.
Yeah, you are amazing.
Thank you. You were huge. And it's been recorded, so you will have access to see what you missed.
Thank
there were some great questions, and Beth's presentation was amazing.
Well, thank you, Holly. And Morgan, I already told everybody that when you finish your PhD that you're going into LAM research. So
You're so committed, Morgan.
there you go.
Best population.
Thank you. I'm going to turn it back to you, Shar.
Yes. Well, thank you, Beth. Thank you, Hallie. And Beth, really, I can't say it any better than what these women have expressed who had the opportunity to participate in the study. The only thing I can add is I just moved away from Seattle a few years too early. Otherwise, I would have been there as number 2. I think Hallie still would have been in ahead as number 1. Yes, so thank you so much for your time this evening. This has been fantastic. And definitely we are excited for things to come. And I trust we'll be hearing from you after the new year.
Yes. So you will. All right. Well, I'll let you guys get to it. I'll get off now. Thank you for your patience and listening this long time. I know I went a little over, so sorry about that.
You are great. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Good night.
Thank you, Beth. Okay. The recording will be stopped momentarily. Beth has left the room, and